Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, November 10th. Mackenzie, Matt Bennett are here. Good morning, guys. Grain markets are kind of mixed here this morning. Let's kick it off with the USDA report.
So USDA increased its estimates of the 2023 U.S. corn and soybean crops yesterday. While acreage was unchanged for both crops, yield estimates were raised. The U.S. corn yield was pegged at 174.9 bushels per acre, up from 173 bushels per acre last month. The result was a 170 million bushel increase to the national production estimate. The U.S. soybean yield was pegged at 49.9 bushels per acre, up from 49.6 bushels per acre last month. The result was a 25 million bushel increase to the production estimate. USDA increased its U.S. corn demand projections in almost every major category, but left the soybean demand projections mostly unchanged.
All right, we'll get to the demand in a second. Let's talk about the yields first. Matt, were you surprised by the yield increases?
No. And so as far as, like with beans, I think we hit it right on the head. On corn, we didn't think they'd go up that high. But I would say, Joe, I mean, we continue to hear, especially like over the last 2 to 3 weeks, a lot of folks saying, hey, my corn was phenomenal. It was way better than what we thought. Early on, I think it was more of a mixed result. I think your very first folks that got in the field said, hey, this is incredible. And then the shine kind of came off of it. Typically, you're going to harvest your first fields first. That's just pretty much best fields first. That's been our experience. Most of my customers talk about the same type of thing, your home farm, if you will, and so a lot of times, of course, it is going to be excellent. But yeah, I don't know, 1.9 bushels. I thought that was incredible. I know you said we're going to talk about demand. I thought it was interesting. The combination of going up like that and seeing carryout go up no more than what it was probably my biggest surprise of the report.
I knew a lot of smart people going into the report who were looking for yield increases along these lines. So I don't think it was necessarily super surprising. I know the market sold off. I know corn made a new low, but now we're just kind of hovering right around those old lows in the corn market this morning. You got record yields for both crops in some states like Indiana and Ohio, especially good. All right, let's talk about demand. So in the case of corn, what USDA did was they made this big increase to the size of the crop. Total crop production estimate up 170 million bushels. But at the same time, they raised the demand estimates in almost every major category. Feed usage up, export projection up, ethanol projection up. So the demand increase in corn was 125 million in total. So your carryout projection only grew by 45 million. Are you on board with the idea of these demand increases or higher demand projections?
I guess my opinion on it's this, Joe. We forecasted whenever we were just running through our balance sheet to come up with a reasonable carryout. We forecasted corn usage for ethanol up 25 million bushels. We felt like that's a change we could make, something we could all get on board with. The export situation. Okay, so if it wasn't for Mexico on the corn side of the ledger, we wouldn't be running as good as what we are. We kind of feel like Mexico's a bit front loaded, if you will. Yes, they're going to need corn throughout the year to an extent, but we feel like they've purchased even more than what we thought that they would. And to me, it feels like without Chinese corn business, the USDA is a little bit head scratcher. It's a kind of a head scratcher for me to go up 50 in this report. I don't know. It kind of feels like to me they don't want to get above a 2.2 for some reason. I feel like they started down at the bottom and worked their way up after they saw the yield, but that's just my opinion.
So you're saying that the situation could actually be more bearish and that USDA is helping the farmer and prices here? Is that what you're trying to argue?
God forbid, Joe. Why would the USDA? I mean, here's the deal, Joe. I don't want their
Drop
job.
the hate in the comments, guys.
I don't want the USDA's job. What I'm saying is feed usage. Okay, so it's feed and residual. Let's keep that in mind. But, everyone gets hung up on, well, how's feed usage going to go up, with livestock numbers where they're at? Well, yeah, I kind of understand that, but it is and residual. So, I mean, they can use that for whatever they want. We know that. That was an interesting adjustment as well. Again, I feel like this is one of those cases where if you want to throw, darts at the USDA, this is probably not the report to do so, especially on the corn side of things.
I'm on board with the ethanol increase, the feed number and the export number. I don't know. As it relates to soybean demand, USDA did not touch crush. They did not touch exports. So you saw essentially the production increase reflected entirely in the carryout increase. Wheat, I won't get too much into, nothing exciting there. Big flash sales yesterday.
Yep. So USDA reported large flash sales of U.S. soybeans on Thursday. U.S. exporters sold 1.04 million metric tons of soybeans to China for delivery during the current marketing year. U.S. exporters also sold 662,500 metric tons of soybeans to unknown destinations for delivery during the current marketing year. Through Thursday, soybean flash sales this week totaled 2.85 million metric tons, or about 105 million bushels.
105 million in 1 week, and the market has essentially sold off following a lot of this, Matt. So was it all figured into the prices? Are these sales why we rallied here, like, ahead of this recent sell-off?
Uh, Here's the thing. Yesterday, you look at the market, and whenever we opened at 8:30, I guess it was just like, what? Are we not going
No
to even
reaction at all.
pay attention to these massive sales? But whenever Brazil, you're talking about some forecasts for their crop that are actually as big or bigger, than what we were talking before. I guess a lot of folks are sitting there looking at the weather down there saying, okay, what gives? The trade, in my opinion, is playing a game of poker here. That I mean, here's the deal. I think Brazil, most of the time, they end up coming up with enough rain to have a decent crop, right? I mean, it's just the nature of their climate. Talking with Eric Snodgrass, though, and he really feels like they've got a situation on their hands that's not going to change quickly. And so I was kind of surprised, quite frankly, that the market sold off the way that it did. 220 to a 245 carry. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, that's tight. I mean, that's still a very tight situation. And you and I both know crush is going to stay strong given the crush margins that we've seen. Argentina has no meal. Argentina has no beans. I've got to think that this bean situation is still a fairly stable one, but I think we rallied solely lately, on what's going on in South America. And I haven't seen any market change down there just yet.
Okay. So I think the board rallied because it knew about these sales like last week. And we rallied into it, and then it was a buy the rumor, sell the fact type deal. Do you remember this? Earlier this year, China bought a whole bunch of U.S. corn, and then they canceled most of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard people say that, you know what, if this Brazilian crop is as good as what CONAB says it is, we'll get to CONAB in a second, China could very well come in and cancel some of these purchases. Do you think that's possible?
I expect them to. Okay. I think China's nervous right now. Whenever you look at what's going on weather-wise, they're nervous. They're saying, oh, what happens if we get in a situation where instead of like a 113 or 115, whatever we're talking right now, that we're going to take this carry down to, let's say 97, you get a world situation where you take 15 million tons off of the Brazil crop. If that's the case, then you're a lot more snug than what most world buyers, I think, would want to see. And so I think China's nervous is what it boils down to. And I'm with you. If it looks like you're going to start to get decent rainfall in Brazil, in the wet areas, they finally catch a break, and they don't continue to get this deluge, and then the dry areas get the rain that the wet areas were getting. I don't know, Joe. I'll tell you what, I would fully expect that they would cancel sales.
Here's the seasonal chart of U.S. soybean export sales. Now, this does not include this week's flash sales. I did some early morning mathematics here. So fast forward to next week's export sales report. Let's assume that they report 3 million metric tons of sales, probably a little bit more than that. Even with 3 million metric tons, looking at the seasonal stuff for next week, we're still going to be behind last year's pace by 8.7 million, or about 24%. So even if these sales are reality, none of them are ever canceled, we probably still need to see some more business.
We do. And it's tough to do whenever, our river's still in the situation that it's in, so we can't run fully efficient. We're not in a great situation there as far as drafts are concerned. And I don't think that we're going to get to normal anytime soon. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess I have a hard time believing that our export program is even going to be as good as what we're thinking currently. I mean, I don't want to be, freaking bearish, but as far as the exports are concerned, but it's just a tough road to hoe right now. But then you've got a situation in the Panama Canal, which in my opinion is quite interesting, for a lot of folks on both sides of the ledger.
Yeah, that's a story that we've heard a little bit about the last couple of weeks. You're kind of having to reroute some U.S. grain shipments. Let's get to the weekly stuff.
U.S. corn export sales increased last week. Net corn sales of 40 million bushels were up 36% from the previous week and 4% from the prior 4-week average. Mexico was the largest corn buyer for the week. Net soybean sales of 40 million bushels were up 7% versus the previous week, but down 8% from the prior 4-week average. China was the largest soybean buyer for the week. Net wheat sales of 13 million bushels were up 29% versus the previous week, but down 26% from the prior 4-week average. South Korea was the largest wheat buyer for the week.
Mexico and Canada have been in the market for U.S. corn. And you know something? U.S. corn export sales have improved. We're like 31% ahead of last year's pace, and that's largely without China.
Right. And that's why I said, I mean, I feel like our business has been good so far. I think the Mexico business is largely expected, if not better than expected, but I think for us to really do what we're hoping to do, I don't know. I don't know how we do it without China on down the road at some point. But who knows? It'll be interesting to see. One thing that I think we need to also remember, though, is that, our business towards the back end of the year may actually perform a little bit better. I mean, Brazil's talking about a pretty decent cut in acres as far as the safrinha crop's concerned. First of all, second of all, I mean, it could even be a bigger cut because if you can't get that crop put in the ground in a timely fashion, and we know, given pushing some of these bean plantings back, that's going to make it tough. I mean, that puts the safrinha crop in a position where they get into the dry season a little earlier than what they'd like to in their reproductive cycle. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe our corn program is going to end up outperforming. I mean, right now it sure looks a heck of a lot better, relatively speaking. It is killing beans. And when's the last time we've been able to say that?
All right, that's a good segue. Let's jump to CONAB.
So on Thursday, CONAB raised its forecast for Brazil's soybean production by about 400,000 metric tons to 162.4 million metric tons. The increase comes despite drought conditions throughout Brazil. Projected soybean acres increased by 2.8% year over year to 112 million acres. CONAB slightly reduced its projection for Brazil's total corn crop to 119 million tons. That's down from 132 million tons last season. Total corn acres are seen at 52 million acres, down 5% from last season.
The corn projections for Brazil are super interesting. So USDA's got Brazil at 129, CONAB's at 119. That 10 million metric tons, that's almost 400 million bushels. That's a big chunk of change, the disparity there. I don't know who's right and who's wrong. The soybean number, so CONAB says it's, despite the weather, still a monster, but there are analysts out there, and quite a few of them, who have already made cuts, thinking that the top end of this is gone. I don't know what to make of it. It's early.
Yeah, I've asked a few folks about it. How would you relate this drought? And they said that where it's bad, it's similar to Argentina a year ago.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Argentina went through hell last year. I mean, there's no question about it. And so I don't know, Joe. I'll tell you what, as far as who to believe on the corn side of things, I don't know. I guess I tend to believe CONAB. I believe the folks that are down there looking at it. I know the USDA's got boots on the ground, though, in all parts of the world at times. But here's the thing. This cut in corn acreage is something that they've been talking about for a little bit. Hard to get a hold of fertilizer. Obviously, fertilizer for a time was extremely expensive. He had a little bit of a respite, but I mean, if you're watching the fertilizer market lately, it's actually been strong again. So I fully believe that they're going to cut back on corn acreage, which is obviously it's going to limit their ability, to be able to raise the kind of crop they've been raising. And on the flip side with beans, here's the thing about it. If they're going to plant a heck of a lot more beans, I guess, Joe, I mean, it gives you a little bit of a buffer, right? You can not have that great of a yield and still have a huge crop. But if they end up in dire straits where they're just got an all-out drought situation, I don't know. I guess my personal thought is that the verdict is out. I think that you could say the bean market could be extremely volatile, over the next 6-8 weeks.
It's so early on corn because, I mean, 3/4 of their crop is the second crop that comes after soybeans. That's not going to be planted for 2 months. It's interesting. We're going to keep talking about Brazilian weather for a while.
USDA released weekly Drought Monitor data yesterday. Drought conditions across the Corn Belt were mostly unchanged this week, with minimal precipitation falling across the area. Unlike the rest of the region, northern Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin were able to catch some moisture, which led to improved conditions. The majority of the high plains were dry this week. South Dakota and northeastern Nebraska saw conditions improve as remnants of the previous week's precipitation eased dry conditions. So when we look at the percentage of U.S. areas experiencing drought, corn country 37%, soybeans 39%, winter wheat 42%, spring wheat 35%, and cattle country 38%.
Look at these river projections. They're talking by Thanksgiving we're going to be 10 feet below normal again at Memphis. That's not good.
No.
By this time last year we had recovered, or we're in the recovery process, and now like we could be back at record lows again 2-3 weeks from now.
Right. Yeah. The problem is you look at the forecast, and there's just not much out there. I mean, it's almost 2 weeks ago now. We had 2 inches of rain in our part of the world. We didn't have a puddle standing anywhere. It's crazy, because we were just that dry. And I think that you could do a system like that throughout the Corn Belt, of 2 to 3 inches, and you're not going to raise draft levels much, because I don't think you're going to get much runoff. I mean, we really need to see a pretty marked difference and change in this weather pattern, or you're not going to get this river, in my opinion, to have sustainable levels where we need to see them. So, we recovered somewhat due to all that rain in the upper Midwest, in the watershed area, if you will, but at the same time, it looks like we're going right back where we came from.
All right, Mackenzie, explain to us why feeder cattle were down $8 yesterday.
Well, to make it clear, feeder cattle futures were down an average of 728 yesterday. Live cattle futures closed an average of 411 lower yesterday. Also, cash cattle trade got pummeled yesterday. In the Southern Plains, cattle traded at 180 to 181, which was $4 to $5 lower compared to the week before. Up here in Nebraska, cattle also traded around that 181 mark, which was down $4 compared to last week. In my opinion, people are still feeling the effects of the bearish cattle on feed report that we had here a couple weeks ago, I believe. And then they're already looking ahead to the next cattle on feed report that looks to be basically a mirror image of the October cattle on feed report, higher placements and higher on feed numbers. But I'm sure Matt has a better take on why we had a bloodbath yesterday.
Well, the USDA also gives numbers, and production, I believe, was just drastically higher than anyone was forecasting, but it kind of lent some credence to the cattle on feed report. And so I don't know, Joe. I mean, if we're bringing cattle in from Mexico, a lot of this makes more sense. If you're not, and I know that we're bringing some in, but you've got to ask, if you continue to see cattle on feed with, a multi-decade low cattle herd, that means that the herd size is going to continue to get smaller, right? I mean, if you just continue to feed all of these females. And so I think that on the backside of this, they could be a very dynamic market. But for the time being, there's no doubt that the shine has come off the market due to what you would say are really strong placements, plenty of meat available, if you will. But at the same time, I would be cautious as to get super bearish in here as far as the long term goes. I think that this blow off top situation that could still happen at some point has probably been pushed back a quarter or two. But that's if it happens. I know maybe we've seen the high. I don't know. I was sure hoping to see that 200 print, because I think the market wanted to see it, and it sure seemed like it was going to. But regardless, you've just absolutely taken it on the chin here.
To me, this just looks like a trade. It's called the get me the F out trade. And I think that there are still some funds probably. I don't know if they're still net long in real time. Who has a clue? But I mean, you don't go down $8 in a day in feeders just on fundamentals alone. There's some technical stuff at play here. There's some big money they've had their fun in the cattle, and now they want out. Outside markets on Fridays, guys, pretty quiet. US dollar's flat. Stocks mixed. Crude oil's up 80 cents, 76.54 in the December WTI. Matt, Mackenzie, have a good weekend. Thank you for joining me. Everybody have a good weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.